This particular installment of Unsung Heroes is, as I've said a number of times throughout the entire series, one of my personal favourites, and the reason why is not only because of the drivetrain of the vehicle in question, but more so because this car is a great underdog story, and one which has actually not ended yet, which might be surprising to some people who have heard of the car before, but secondly, I think that this car does one thing so well that I would call it genius, and I'm going to get into that very specifically in this video. Now, the car in question is called the Lightning GT, and for those who are not familiar with the car at all, it's electric. This is a fully EV sports car minimum, you could say supercar, depending on your definition of the term. But the story behind it is a fascinating one. And interestingly, the story actually starts in 1999 with a vehicle that isn't electric. And that actually ties in later on to my favourite thing about the car, but we'll get back to that. In 1999, a vehicle called the Ronart V8 Targa is being produced, a prototype, and it's being painted in blue to be shown at the Earl's Court London Motor Show in that same year. Now, the guy spraying the car just made an offhand comment about it looking like lightning blue, and the owner of the brand, Arthur Wolstenholme, decided to trademark the name as the name of the car, the Ronart Lightning V8. And then they showed it at that Earl's Court show in 1999, and it wowed the public. People loved it. It's a quintessentially British idea. It looks like a TVR Tuscan or a Marcos TSO, a great new little contender on the scene, and they actually did produce some cars between 2001 and 2003, but then due to some unforeseen circumstances, they halted production. Fast forward to 2006, a guy by the name of Lane Sanderson, who was actually one of the buyers of those original cars in 2001, who was a bit disgruntled with the fact that the company wasn't really around anymore, decided to buy the company and the trademark associated with it. Then, the next year, the idea of an electric version was born in 2007, as I said. And a guy by the name of Daniel Durant, a designer, was brought on board to join the project and to redesign the car with the same essential silhouette, but with newer features and updated details. And I would say on a personal note that for the time, I think this is every bit as good looking as a Jag XK or an Aston of that same kind of time period. Just 9 months after that, in 2008, the vehicle is built and ready for a motor show. The London Motor Show, once again, and it was actually built by a company called Drive, who are an automotive agency. And in that year, at that motor show, it won Car of the Show. Things are going pretty well so far as this vehicle goes, and this is around the kind of time that I remember first reading about the vehicle. It was around 2007, 2008. At the time, I wasn't as much into electric cars as I am now, but I do recall liking the design quite a lot and thinking that it was a cool idea to have this, supercar that was electric. It wasn't really a thing at the time. And the ball didn't stop rolling, because the next year in 2009, the car attended Geneva and caused another stir. People really, really liked it. In 2010, they developed a road-legal prototype and began testing the vehicle. And this is where things start to get more and more impressive, because between 2011 and 2013, the vehicle was actually enrolled in something called the EEMS, the Environmental Emissions Monitoring System. And it was basically like a long-term group road test to determine the reliability of certain vehicles. This car participated in that. Technically a prototype, a road-going prototype, but still a prototype nonetheless. That immediately shows the kind of confidence that the company had. Not only did the car win that test, it covered more miles than all of the other vehicles in the test combined, and had a reliability rating after that 12-month test of 100%. It did not break once. Now, it's after this point that things got a lot more quiet, and it actually got quiet to the point where you don't really see or hear much about this car at all anymore, because between 2014 and 2018, it went into more of a heavy-duty testing phase, because of course, producing a car is not an easy thing, especially when it is something like an electric vehicle. It's not like there's a ton of precedent and as many people in those fields to get stuff done as there are in a traditional car company sense. And even then, it can be a challenge, and ton of cars a ton of cars even don't see the light of day. But within that time period of 2014 to 2018, they took the car to test it at Elvington with a MagTech motor, and they actually achieved nearly 160 miles an hour out of the car. And this is still around the same time that Tesla had the Model S Performance, still with rear-wheel drive, around 400 horsepower. The crazy, P90Ds and all that hadn't really become a thing quite yet. Not in around the 2014 time at least. So this was impressive stuff. Rimac was not a thing yet. A ton of these companies that we know and love now, especially the more recent ones like the Aspark Owl and that kind of stuff, they weren't around yet. And of course, as I mentioned, its development continues. They didn't rest on their laurels, they didn't let the project die by any stretch, they continued testing what was already an impressive car. So far we've got a car that looks as good, I would say, as a Jag or an Aston or a Marcos or a TVR. It can do 160 miles an hour, and it had a perfect long-term reliability test. Things are looking pretty damn impressive so far, which is kind of atypical for a small British brand, especially on the reliability front. Then in 2019, so probably a lot more recent than people who have heard of this car would think, you'd probably assume it was dead by this point, or just vaporware perhaps, they announced a partnership with Continental for drivetrain and platforms of the vehicle, and they've begun plans for 2020. So the car is not dead. And for those of you who have seen or heard of the car before, maybe like I did years ago, you'd probably have thought that it was a dead idea. And for me, when I started researching this vehicle to make this episode, I actually did think that it was a dead car. I thought it had gone away. A unicorn, a victim of being too early for its time, in a somewhat ironic way considering how popular electric cars are now, in, funnily enough, a very similar sense to my thoughts on the Spiker D8 SUV concept, which again was kind of too early for its time. If that car was released this year, people would be clamoring for it and it would have probably saved Spiker, because they're not exactly producing a lot of cars right now. But it came out too early. It was my understanding, based on the fact that there didn't exactly seem to be a huge amount of chatter, that a similar thing had happened to this car. But it hasn't. They're still around. You can read all of the timeline stuff that I just mentioned on their website, which I've linked down in the description, and it's still ongoing. They have plans for 2020. They are still, by all means, developing the car, and I am fascinated to see where this project ends up. But in terms of the performance and the spec, I covered some of it already. Of course, perfect reliability in testing, and for a prototype of any type, that's incredible, let alone electric from a small British company. But the car is heavy, as you'd expect. It weighs 1,850 kilos, which for our American viewers is over 4,000 pounds, not far off 4,100 pounds in fact. But again, no surprise there, batteries are very, very heavy, and that is still lighter, for instance, than a Rimac, which is up around 2 tons, likewise for a Tesla. And even as far as production quality goes, it actually supersedes what it could easily be. And let's be honest, what many small British sports cars are kind of known for. Fiberglass bodies, chassis held together with chewing gum and hope. This car isn't like that. In fact, it has an aluminium honeycomb frame, which is incredibly strong torsionally. The body is carbon fiber. It's impressive stuff for any manufacturer, let alone such a tiny one that many of us could have easily thought was dead. And as far as the spec, nearly 500 horsepower, which maybe doesn't sound that impressive compared to your 2,000 horsepower Rimacs, but what it can do with that is actually very impressive. Partially because of the fact that not only does it have that 500 horsepower going to the wheels, but it also has 4,000 Newton meters of torque, which of course is going to make it pretty quick off the line regardless of the weight. So overall, this is a car that has incredible performance for what it is. A car that can do 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds from 500 horsepower is easily on par with what you'd want from a sports car or a super sports car at least. The top speed is limited to 155, no surprise there for electric cars even by today's standards, and even the battery range is a quoted 500 kilometers, which is about 310 miles, which again is really good stuff. You compare that, for instance, to the fuel tank range of an equivalent sports car, well, it ain't 310 miles, generally speaking, and a supercar generally isn't either, and that's putting it lightly. Plus, you can recharge the vehicle in about 2.5 hours with the technology that they're using. So across the board, it's a car which certainly isn't as famous as Tesla, Rimac, even something as recent as the Aspark Owl. And yet at the same time, what a car. I believe that it's a stunning, certainly a very quick and very impressive underdog story which is far from over. I certainly hope that they succeed, especially after all this time and development. And getting back to the point that I mentioned at the start of the video, my single favourite thing, I believe the most genius thing about this vehicle, which so many electric manufacturers completely miss, and actually one of the reasons why, if it does reach production, it may well be my favourite electric car on the market, is because it looks good. It doesn't look electric. I believe that so many manufacturers, both for cars and bikes, really drop the ball when it comes to electric vehicle design. I'm not necessarily saying they look bad. I just think that sometimes they try too hard to make them look like a spaceship, or that, oh look, this is definitely an electric car. Check out how we're really going out of our way to make it look wacky and futuristic. We don't need that. Many people are already disconcerted about the idea of having an electric car because maybe they've never experienced it. Maybe they're nervous about how safe it is, or how reliable or how practical it is. Some people already don't like them specifically, and those designs probably often don't help. Why not help people out by making the car gorgeous to begin with? Something that doesn't look electric, it just looks good. This car could easily have that original V8 that it started with, or even a V12, and it would look right at home. That is genius. Don't make electric cars look electric. Make them look good, and that they happen to be electric is just a bonus. And as far as I'm concerned, as simple and as superfluous as that advantage may seem to be, I believe it's the strongest single advantage that this car has in its arsenal. But overall, that's it for this installment. Of course, stick around next week for the actual top 10 countdown that I've been talking about for quite a few episodes. And of course, if you want to see this car on the list, which I certainly hope it would be, then vote for it. Click on the link down below, jump over to Discord, and vote for this car in the voting polls. But overall, that's it for this installment. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.